Before we begin, tell me, where in the world are you watching from, and what time has found you? Tonight's subject is simple to name and difficult to survive thinking about. The most powerful entity in cosmic horror. Not the loudest monster, not the most violent presence. Power, in this tradition, means something colder. It means the ability to exist without concern, without opposition, and without awareness of us at all. That distinction matters more than it first appears. Cosmic horror emerged in the early 20th century, when writers began questioning whether the universe had any reason to include human meaning. In that moment, power stopped being measured by strength or cruelty. It became a matter of scale, of duration, of indifference. The most powerful entity is not feared because it attacks. It is feared because it does not need to. We must pause here. This idea did not appear from nowhere. It grew from older myths, modern astronomy, and a rising sense that knowledge itself might shrink us rather than elevate us. By the 1920s and 1930s, this worldview found a language that still shapes horror today. What follows is not a ranking, and not a hunt for a final answer. Instead, we will trace how this figure took form, how it behaves in stories, and why it continues to disturb readers across generations. By listening, you are already participating in the question. And once the question is understood, it does not easily let go. The concept of a most powerful entity in cosmic horror cannot be separated from the historical moment that birthed the genre. At the turn of the 20th century, Western thought was undergoing a radical transformation. Darwin had already challenged humanity's special place in creation. Nietzsche declared God dead. And Einstein's work in physics had begun to dissolve traditional understandings of space and time. Against this backdrop, horror was no longer about devils or ghosts. It began to explore what it meant to exist in a universe without purpose, order, or protection. This is the soil from which the idea of a supreme, unknowable force emerged, not as a villain, but as a symbol of ultimate irrelevance. H.P. Lovecraft, the central figure in this shift, made his intent clear in both letters and stories. He did not write monsters to scare children. He wrote metaphors to express cosmic indifference. In a 1927 letter to Farnsworth Wright, he described The Call of Cthulhu not as a tale of horror, but as a literary experiment in expressing man's utter insignificance in the face of the unknown. Power, for Lovecraft, meant not domination, but disregard. The most terrifying being imaginable would not destroy humanity. It would forget we ever existed. This marked a fundamental break from earlier horror. In Gothic and supernatural traditions, entities might be evil, but they still operated within a moral framework. Dracula, for example, had motives and weaknesses. He was intelligible. But the beings of cosmic horror defy comprehension. They are not malevolent, but immoral. Their power lies in their detachment from human categories altogether. This is why Lovecraft often described them as blind, mindless, or vast. Their supremacy was expressed through apathy, not intent. The historical pressures of Lovecraft's time intensified this shift. The aftermath of World War I shattered faith in progress and civilization. Mass death, mechanized warfare, and cultural disillusionment all contributed to a sense that humanity was not evolving toward order, but plunging into chaos. Cosmic horror became a literary mirror to this loss of meaning. The most powerful entity in this light becomes a stand-in for the modern condition, something too big to understand, too ancient to oppose, and too indifferent to notice our despair. The horror is not in its wrath, but in its silence. Lovecraft was not alone in this project, though he articulated it most clearly. Writers like Algernon, Blackwood, M.R. James, and Arthur Machen also touched on the idea that true horror lay in contact with the incomprehensible. Yet Lovecraft radicalized the idea by stripping it of the supernatural. The power he described was not from hell, but from deep time and distant galaxies. By grounding his horrors in pseudoscience, references to astronomy, geology, non-Euclidean geometry, he created a new language for fear. His intent was not to suggest evil in the traditional sense, but to present existence itself as terrifying when stripped of comforting illusions. We must pause here to emphasize what this reveals. The most powerful entity in this tradition is not defined by what it does, but by what it implies. It implies that human beings are temporary, fragile, and fundamentally alone. Its power is metaphysical, not physical. It collapses, meaning simply by existing. This idea reframed horror itself, from external threat to existential recognition. In doing so, it invited readers not merely to feel fear, but to question the foundations of their worldview. As we transition to cultural and philosophical antecedents, we begin to see that Lovecraft's entity was not entirely new. Older traditions also grappled with the terror of scale, of unknowability, of divine silence. What cosmic horror did was refine those intuitions into something colder, more articulate, and harder to dismiss. The next section will explore how these older myths, philosophies, and systems of belief shaped the intellectual architecture beneath cosmic horror's most powerful figure. Cosmic horror did not invent the idea of beings beyond human comprehension. Instead, it restructured older worldviews, mythic, religious, philosophical, into a new framework of existential terror. Ancient cultures often acknowledged powers that dwarfed humanity, but they couched these forces in stories that offered purpose or morality. The innovation of cosmic horror was to remove those assurances. It kept the scale, but severed the connection. What emerged was not a god to be feared or worshipped, but a presence that made worship irrelevant. In classical mythology, the titans and primordial deities already hinted at this sense of vastness. Greek cosmogony begins with chaos, a void from which the cosmos takes form. Chaos was not evil, it simply was. This concept resonates strongly with later visions of entities like Azathoth or Yog-Sothoth. Beings not malevolent, but foundational, impersonal, and immovable. Similarly, in Mesopotamian and Babylonian cosmology, entities like Tiamat represented raw, formless power, eventually slain, but never truly comprehended. These early myth systems laid a conceptual groundwork for cosmic horror's emphasis on the unshaped and unshapable. However, the philosophical lineage matters just as much. Consider the German philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, who argued in the 19th century that human desire was a form of suffering and that the universe operated according to a blind, indifferent will. Lovecraft read Schopenhauer, and his fiction echoes that worldview. Suffering is not inflicted by design, but by accident, by our attempt to find meaning where none exists. Friedrich Nietzsche, likewise, broke the illusion of cosmic order by declaring that values are human constructions. When Lovecraft created his pantheon, he placed it in a reality that obeyed no moral axis. These were not gods in the theological sense, but principles embodied. Their power was metaphysical, not moral. Eastern traditions, too, feed into this lineage. Certain interpretations of Hindu cosmology and Buddhist thought entertain the idea of vast cycles of creation and destruction governed by forces entirely outside human control. In some tantric texts, the gods are not creators in the Western sense, but emanations of deeper patterns, realities that are cyclical, infinite, and largely indifferent. While Lovecraft was not directly influenced by these ideas, the resemblance is striking. In both systems, the universe is unimaginably old, recursive, and unconcerned with individual lives. We must pause here. The difference between ancient awe and modern dread lies in expectation. Ancient peoples feared their gods, but assumed some reciprocal order, a covenant, a consequence, a lesson. Cosmic horror ruptures that assumption. It offers no path to redemption, no wisdom to decode. Instead, it reflects the modern suspicion that reality does not owe us meaning. The most powerful entity in cosmic horror is terrifying, precisely because it replaces divine order with structural indifference. Where myth once promised narrative, horror now delivers silence. Science, paradoxically, became a major contributor to this dread. The expanding universe, the realization of deep time, the development of quantum theory, each discovery pushed humanity further from the center of things. Lovecraft and his successors embedded this scientific backdrop into their fiction. Entities are discovered via geology, astronomy, or mathematics, not through sacred texts. This creates a paradoxical effect. Knowledge becomes both the path and the poison. The more one knows, the worse it gets. The most powerful being is thus not just beyond our reach. It is revealed through the very tools meant to illuminate reality. This leads to a key insight. Cosmic horror inherits the aesthetic of myth, but the conclusions of modern philosophy. It borrows the language of gods, demons, and monsters, but uses them to express ideas closer to nihilism and absurdism. In a way, Lovecraft's work is myth without consolation. There is grandeur, but no guidance. There is scale, but no story. Readers are left with a vision that feels old and sacred, but behaves with scientific coldness. This dissonance is precisely what makes the most powerful entity so disturbing. It carries the emotional weight of divinity, yet offers none of its comfort. As we transition into the symbolic structure of this tradition, the names, the words, the glyphs, we must consider one final point. The power of these entities is not simply what they do within a story, but what they represent within a culture. They are the ghosts of forgotten gods, the shadows cast by telescopes and equations, the residue of human longing colliding with an unfeeling cosmos. To understand them fully, we must next examine the language used to summon them, the etymologies, sigils, and symbols that pretend to capture what remains unnameable. Power, in cosmic horror, is rarely spoken directly. Instead, it hides in names, sigils, glyphs, and phonemes that appear ancient, unpronounceable, and suspiciously precise. The language surrounding the most powerful entity is intentionally constructed to feel older than human civilization and resistant to translation. This resistance is the point. The more a word refuses interpretation, the more powerful it becomes within the logic of the genre. Naming is not revelation, it is misdirection, a false foothold offered in a bottomless chasm. Consider the names that recur across Lovecraftian fiction: Azathoth, Nyarlathotep, Yog-Sothoth. They do not resemble Indo-European or Semitic linguistic structures. Instead, they appear as phonetically complex amalgamations designed to bypass ordinary linguistic patterns. Lovecraft admitted to crafting these names to evoke a semi-unknown alien tongue, deliberately avoiding familiar etymologies. In his letters, he described the goal as phonetic suggestion, a way to produce psychic effect through the shape and rhythm of the word alone. In other words, the name should feel real, even if it means nothing. The illusion of deep origin is what lends weight. This is not new. Ancient religious and magical traditions often relied on the idea of true names, words that could command, summon, or describe a thing's essence. In Egyptian mythology, Isis gains power over Ra by learning his secret name. In medieval grimoires, demons were controlled by correct identification. The same motif reappears in Jewish Kabbalah, where divine language structures creation itself. What Lovecraft does is invert this logic. The names in cosmic horror do not grant power over the being. They merely mark the threshold of madness. To speak them is not to gain control, but to acknowledge helplessness. The tradition is preserved, but its meaning is reversed. The written symbols, particularly in fictional tomes like the Necronomicon, Unaussprechlichen Kulten, and Kulte de Ghoul, follow a similar strategy. Their glyphs and diagrams are often described but never shown, referenced but never clarified. This narrative restraint heightens their potency. By never fully visualizing these symbols, Lovecraft and his successors allow readers to project their own fear and fascination into the void space left behind. The most powerful glyph, therefore, is one that refuses full exposure. It is a cipher without a key. This aligns with the genre's larger obsession with epistemic collapse. Language reaches its limit and then turns inward, consuming the mind that seeks too hard to interpret. We must pause here. Why does language matter so much in cosmic horror? Because language is the foundation of thought, order, and human identity. To dismantle it, by introducing words that cannot be known, symbols that defy reading, is to attack the structure of knowing itself. The most powerful entity in cosmic horror is not described through feats or miracles, but through the way its name destabilizes sense. In many stories, characters are undone not by an encounter with the being, but by the act of translating a passage, tracing a rune, or dreaming a syllable. The horror begins not with contact, but with comprehension attempted. Importantly, these invented languages draw on real-world linguistic unease. Early 20th century anthropology brought Western audiences into contact with languages that operated far outside European norms. At the same time, newly discovered ancient scripts, like Linear B, cuneiform, or the still undeciphered Voynich manuscript, entered popular awareness. Lovecraft read widely in these areas. These symbolic languages of his mythos reflect this intersection between philological fascination and colonial anxiety. The unfamiliar was not simply exotic, it was threatening. In a modern context, these tropes can be problematic, reflecting unconscious biases. But within the fictional framework, they serve to reinforce the core idea: the world is not built for human understanding. This brings us to a crucial insight. The symbolic language surrounding the most powerful being is not ornamental, it is structural. It holds the mythos together by pretending to offer meaning while withdrawing it at the last moment. The name promises recognition, but delivers ambiguity. The glyph tempts with form, but withholds function. This semiotic strategy ensures that the being remains untouchable. Its power is preserved by never being fully represented. It is a god whose shrine is built from eroded syntax and broken grammar. The linguistic traces are ruins, not blueprints. As we move next to the construction of myth itself, how these symbols are embedded within fake histories, pseudo-anthropologies, and forged texts, we begin to see how narrative authority is manufactured. The most powerful entity is not just an idea, It is a presence built from carefully layered fragments that mimic scholarly depth. The next section will trace how myth-building strategies transform language into doctrine and invention into inevitability. Cosmic horror relies not on spectacle, but on structure, specifically the illusion of an ancient, internally consistent mythos. The most powerful entity in this tradition gains its weight not from a single story, but from its embeddedness within a fabricated history. This history is neither linear nor complete. Instead, it is made of fragments, false documents, obscure references, and scholarly footnotes that construct the appearance of depth. The reader is not told a myth. They are invited to uncover it, and in that uncovering, they are implicated. This method was central to Lovecraft's approach. He understood that fear deepens when the reader feels like an intruder rather than a spectator. His invented books, the Necronomicon, Pnakotic manuscripts, Eltdown shards, serve as narrative relics. They are never fully quoted, only glimpsed. This partial access makes them feel real. They mimic how we encounter real ancient texts, in fragments, translations, and disputed interpretations. The effect is cumulative. The more stories mention the same arcane volume or forgotten cult, the more the reader begins to believe in their historical presence. We must pause here to consider a key technique, the scholarly parasite. Lovecraft and his circle often wrote as if merely reporting or analyzing older materials. Characters do not invent, they discover. And what they discover predates them by centuries, sometimes millennia. This structure replicates the voice of academic study, but without the reassurance of clarity. It frames horror as research gone too far. The protagonist is not cursed by a monster, but by a body of knowledge that was always waiting. The most powerful being in this model is not active. Its existence is merely uncovered, and that is enough to unravel everything. This strategy of myth-building has a literary precedent. Consider the way Tolkien constructed Middle-earth through appendices, invented languages, and faux historical texts. But where Tolkien aimed for richness and coherence, cosmic horror seeks the opposite: contradiction, distortion, and unreliability. The mythos grows more convincing because it refuses to stabilize. Stories contradict one another. Names change across regions. Dates blur. This gives the impression of a myth that has been misremembered across centuries, hallmark of real-world folklore. The power of the central entity increases as certainty decreases. Even the geography of the mythos contributes to this illusion. Locations like Arkham, Dunwich, and Innsmouth are placed alongside real Massachusetts towns. This blend of fiction and fact grounds the stories in the familiar, making the intrusion of the mythic more disturbing. Similarly, invented anthropological references, tribes in Siberia, ruins in Arabia, carvings in Antarctica, mirror real scholarly discourses. The most powerful being is not shown, but inferred through archaeological hints, astronomical alignments, and translated chants. Its presence is always just outside the text, pressing in from the margins. Consider this carefully. Myth-building here is not a background device. It is the primary mechanism of fear. The most terrifying figure is one that feels culturally inherited, not individually authored. Lovecraft's great achievement was not simply creating monsters, but convincing his readers that those monsters were already part of an older, hidden history. When later writers, Clark Ashton Smith, August Derleth, Ramsey Campbell, expanded the mythos, they often did so by mimicking this same technique. layering new documents, reinterpretations, and revelations over an already unstable foundation. The myth evolves, not by contradiction being resolved, but by accumulating unresolved echoes. As we prepare to examine the philosophical heart of this entity's terror, we leave behind the textual veil and turn toward conceptual substance. What does it mean to be powerless in a universe governed by something that cannot be fought, understood, or even fully perceived? The next section will explore how cosmic horror uses this mythic framework to pose unanswerable questions about entropy, madness, and the limits of the human mind. The myth has been built. Now we descend into what it implies. Cosmic horror, at its foundation, is a literature of collapse, of meaning, of structure, of the self. Its most powerful entities embody this collapse in philosophical form. They are not simply large or ancient. They represent principles that unravel human certainty. Three core ideas form the philosophical spine of cosmic horror: human insignificance, entropy as destiny, and the instability of reality itself. Together, they construct a worldview in which terror arises not from malice, but from recognition. Insignificance is not a mood in cosmic horror. It is a metaphysical position. It begins with the Copernican trauma. The Earth is not the center. Lovecraft magnifies this dislocation until it consumes everything. In The Whisperer in Darkness, a professor learns that the stars are inhabited, and human beings are of no consequence at all to cosmic beings whose lifespans dwarf aeons. The most powerful entity is terrifying not because it targets us, but because we are beneath its notice. This is not death by design. It is erasure by scale. A figure like Azathoth, the blind idiot god at the center of chaos, does not hate us. It simply spins forever, unaware. That is far worse. Entropy operates as the metaphysical gravity of this universe. In thermodynamics, entropy refers to disorder, increasing over time. In cosmic horror, it becomes a symbol of inevitable unraveling, of civilizations, knowledge, sanity. The most powerful being is often positioned not just as old, but as older than the concept of time itself. In At the Mountains of Madness, ancient murals describe beings who predate the stars. Their rise and fall is just one cycle among many. Entropy becomes a kind of theology here, not a flaw in creation, but its primary law. The terrifying power of the entity lies in its embodiment of that law. It is not the destroyer, but the condition under which all things decay. Dream reality instability is the final, most intimate blow. In many cosmic horror tales, the distinction between waking and dreaming collapses. This is not surrealism for style's sake. It is epistemic sabotage. When a character like Randolph Carter, in The Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath, traverses layers of dream worlds that seem more real than waking life, the reader is forced to ask, what anchors perception? If dreams can have laws, civilizations, even gods, then what differentiates them from reality? The most powerful entity in such stories is one that moves between layers without effort. It is not bound to the real or the unreal. It defines what counts as real in the first place. We must pause here. These three principles, insignificance, entropy, dream instability, form more than atmosphere. They are the ontology of cosmic horror. They dictate what exists, how it behaves, and why it matters, or doesn't. The genre does not merely tell stories under these assumptions. It enacts them. Characters who seek truth end in madness. Those who avoid it live in ignorance. The most powerful being represents the endpoint of all inquiry, the place where reality no longer returns answers, only echoes. Importantly, these ideas were not exclusive to fiction. Lovecraft read widely in contemporary science and philosophy. His letters reference astronomers like Percival Lowell, whose theories of Martian canals stoked dreams of a wider cosmos, and thinkers like Tyndall and Spencer, who explored naturalistic explanations for life and consciousness. The literature of cosmic horror is thus not anti-science. It is hyper-scientific. It extends scientific materialism to its ultimate consequence, a world where nothing is sacred, not even the self. And yet, the genre never collapses fully into nihilism. There is always a trace of awe, a lingering majesty. The most powerful entity may symbolize the end of meaning, but it does so in a form that commands reverence. This is the paradox of cosmic horror. The sacred is preserved by being emptied. What remains is the form of godhood, but without the mercy, morality, or memory. It is divinity reimagined as a black hole. In the next section, we turn to how these principles manifest not as abstract ideas, but as living or unliving forces. What shapes do these entities take? What makes one force more unsettling than another? And how does narrative even attempt to contain what is, by definition, beyond form? We now enter the domain of the beings themselves. Cosmic horror rarely reveals its entities in full. Instead, it gestures toward forces so vast and alien that even a fragment of their nature can unmake a mind. These entities are not characters. They are not governed by motives or personalities. They are forces, conceptual, physical, and metaphysical, that inhabit the genre's void. Their power lies not in domination, but in dislocation. Each represents a breakdown of human categories, of time, space, logic, even identity. To examine them is to confront the outer edge of comprehension. Perhaps the most infamous of these is Azathoth, the blind idiot, God, who sits at the center of all things, gnawing hungrily in the dark. He is not an antagonist, but a metaphor made animate. Azathoth is the embodiment of chaos without will, energy without intelligence. He does not rule the cosmos. He is the cosmos, stripped of order. The piping flutes that surround him are not music, but entropy manifest. His power lies in indifference so total that it annihilates structure. One cannot appeal to Azathoth. One can only accept his existence as proof that the universe has no center that cares. In contrast, Yog-Sothoth is a being of unity, a paradoxical all-in-one entity, described as being coterminous with all time and space. In the Dunwich horror, he is the key and the gate, a phrase that recurs like a theological formula. Yog-Sothoth's power is epistemic. He is the structure of reality, and thus knows all. Yet this knowledge is fatal. Those who summon him gain brief insights into the universe's workings, but always at the cost of sanity or dissolution. He exists to remind readers that some knowledge is structurally incompatible with the human mind. Power here is not expressed through destruction, but through comprehension that cannot be survived. Nyarlathotep, the crawling chaos, introduces another form of power, legibility. Unlike the other entities, Nyarlathotep takes shapes, speaks languages, and walks among humans. He has avatars, masks that range from Egyptian pharaohs to monstrous configurations. His terror lies in his proximity. He is the interface between cosmic disorder and human culture. In the dream quest of unknown Kadath, he torments Randolph Carter not through violence, but through manipulation of perception and fear. Where Azathoth represents chaos and Yog-Sothoth totality, Nyarlathotep represents translation. He makes the unknowable seem known, just long enough to corrupt or betray. We must pause here. These entities are not ranked by strength, nor are they allies or enemies. They do not form a hierarchy. This is not a pantheon, but a broken taxonomy, each being its own category of terror. The most powerful entity is not the one who wins a conflict, but the one who defies comparison. This is why even lesser entities, like Shub-Niggurath, the black goat of the woods with 1,000 young, or the formless spawn of Tsathoggua, can feel omnipotent within their domains. Their power is not measured. It is inferred from the damage left behind. The Dreamlands beings add another dimension. While often more narrative in function, they complicate the cosmology. The Dreamlands, first explored in the Dream Quest of unknown Kadath, are an interstitial realm, part subconscious, part alternate plane. Here, gods and monsters coexist in a surreal ecosystem. Figures like the Great Ones or the Moon Beasts reveal that even the dream world has its own structure, its own rulers, and its own laws of terror. The most powerful entity might reside not in waking space, but in a realm where thought itself becomes architecture. This opens a deeper question. If our dreams can be colonized, what part of the self remains untouched? These entities often communicate not directly, but through vectors, texts, dreams, voices from the stars, or genetic memory. Their appearance is not always physical. Instead, they are often known through symptoms, madness, mutation, obsession. In the Call of Cthulhu, the titular being remains imprisoned beneath the sea, yet its influence spreads globally through dreams and cults. The entity itself is less dangerous than its resonance. This pattern is crucial. The most powerful force is not the one that acts, but the one that causes others to act in service of something they can't fully perceive. As we move into the human dimension, the minds that break, the bodies that contort, we will see how these entities function less as characters and more as stress tests for human understanding. They exist not to be defeated, but to show what collapses when they are acknowledged. The true horror is not that they exist. It is that we do, and we are too fragile to withstand the implications. Human beings rarely encounter cosmic entities directly. When they do, the encounter is brief, fragmentary, and devastating. More often, interaction occurs indirectly, through dreams, artifacts, genetic inheritance, or incomplete knowledge. This distance is deliberate. Cosmic horror understands that direct contact would collapse narrative tension. Instead, it studies exposure. What happens when a finite mind brushes against something infinite? Madness, in this tradition, is not a punishment. It is a mechanical consequence. Lovecraft repeatedly framed madness as a failure of scale. In The Call of Cthulhu, the narrator warns that the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality. The threat is not violence, but synthesis. Characters go mad when they connect facts that were never meant to coexist. A sailor sees too much geometry. A scholar translates one passage too many. A dreamer recognizes a city that should not exist. Madness functions as the mind's emergency response, an attempt to protect itself by fragmenting perception. Sanity cannot survive total context. Importantly, this madness is not portrayed as random hysteria. It follows patterns. Victims experience obsession, derealization, and a collapse of identity boundaries. In The Shadow Out of Time, Nathaniel Peaslee does not scream or panic. He studies, catalogs, and remembers. His terror emerges slowly as he realizes his mind has been exchanged across time with an alien intelligence. This reveals something crucial. Madness in cosmic horror is often quiet. It looks like insight. The most dangerous characters are not those who lose control, but those who gain clarity they cannot integrate. We must pause here. Cosmic horror treats rationality itself as fragile. Enlightenment ideals promised that knowledge would liberate humanity. Lovecraft inverts this promise. Knowledge enslaves. The more accurately one perceives reality, the less human one becomes. This is why scholars, scientists, and artists are frequent victims. They are trained to notice patterns, to question appearances, to pursue truth beyond comfort. In this genre, those virtues become liabilities. Madness is not the opposite of reason. It is reason carried too far. Another recurring interaction occurs through heredity and biology. In The Shadow over Innsmouth, the horror unfolds not through discovery alone, but through inheritance. The narrator learns that his blood connects him to something ancient and non-human. His madness is gradual and eventually voluntary. He does not resist transformation. This complicates the moral frame. Contact with the cosmic does not always destroy. Sometimes it recruits. The human mind adapts by abandoning its former identity. Madness becomes metamorphosis. The self dissolves, and something older takes its place. Dreams serve as a third mode of interaction. They bypass conscious defenses. In the dream quest of unknown Kadath, Randolph Carter navigates a landscape shaped by desire, memory, and myth. Yet even here, the cosmic intrudes. Dream entities manipulate him. Gods observe him. Reality proves no more stable than sleep. This suggests that the mind has no safe interior. Even imagination is accessible. Madness, then, is not just psychological breakdown. It is the realization that there is no private space left untouched. Notice what is absent. There is no recovery arc. Characters do not heal. At best, they retreat into ignorance. At worst, they disappear, into cult service, into exile, into non-human existence. This reflects a broader philosophical stance. Once certain truths are known, they cannot be unknown. Madness marks a threshold crossed, not a condition to be treated. The most powerful entity does not drive humans insane deliberately. It simply exists in a way that the human mind cannot accommodate. Insanity is the price of proximity. This function of madness also serves a narrative purpose. It preserves mystery. By rendering witnesses unreliable, the genre avoids full disclosure. Testimonies contradict. Journals end abruptly. Accounts are framed as confessions or warnings. The reader is placed in a precarious position, close enough to understand the danger, too distant to confirm it. This instability mirrors the character's own fractured perception. Madness becomes both theme and structure. As we turn next to forbidden knowledge itself, we will see how madness operates as the final safeguard. Some things are not protected by force, but by consequence. The universe does not hide its truths. It leaves them in plain sight, knowing that comprehension carries its own annihilation. In cosmic horror, knowledge is a substance with weight, and the human mind is too fragile to bear it. The most powerful entities do not destroy the body, they dismantle the frameworks by which the self interprets reality. Forbidden knowledge, then, is not merely information that is hidden. It is information that undoes the knower. It triggers epistemic collapse, the failure of one's conceptual system to integrate a truth without shattering. To know certain things is not to be enlightened, it is to be erased. This is why forbidden texts, not weapons, dominate the genre. The Necronomicon is not a magical object in the traditional sense. It is a philosophical toxin. In the Dunwich horror, its translations unleash rituals that alter matter and space, but more significantly, they alter understanding. The horror lies not in what the book contains, but in the fact that it makes sense. That a human can read it, grasp it, and still remain, if only briefly, human. To possess forbidden knowledge is to step outside the structure of human meaning while still being trapped inside a human body. We must pause here. What defines forbidden in this context? It is not moral prohibition. It is structural incompatibility. The knowledge in these texts is not dangerous because it reveals evil acts. It is dangerous because it changes the ontological rules of the world. Time does not behave as expected. Space is non-Euclidean. Identity is unstable. In the dreams in the witch house, the protagonist discovers that mathematics can map trans-dimensional travel. His fate is not to be punished for sin, but to be exposed to truths that override all protective ignorance. Forbidden knowledge is not what we are told to avoid. It is what the universe was never built for us to perceive. This idea mirrors real-world anxieties from the early 20th century. The rise of quantum mechanics, the discovery of relativity, and the fragmentation of classical models of reality all contributed to a cultural atmosphere in which knowledge no longer reassured. Lovecraft's fiction does not oppose science. It accepts its premises and follows them into horror. If the universe is expanding, impersonal, and governed by invisible forces, then the old comforts, religion, morality, even reason, may no longer apply. The most powerful entity, in this light, is the one whose reality makes all other realities obsolete. A recurring motif is the misreading of knowledge. Characters believe they are uncovering ancient wisdom, but what they find is something deeper, older, and incompatible. In The Thing on the Doorstep, the protagonist studies the occult, believing he can control it. Instead, his mind is overwritten. Knowledge does not empower, it displaces. What makes it forbidden is that it persists after the self is gone. The ideas remain, but the mind that housed them has been bent into something else. This inversion of the Enlightenment ideal, where knowledge is not illumination but infection, is one of cosmic horror's central terrors. Dreams again play a vital role here. They bypass critical resistance. In The Call of Cthulhu, artists, poets, and sensitives across the globe experience shared visions. These are not hallucinations. They are symptoms of a deeper informational breach. The Great Dream becomes a distributed transmission, suggesting that forbidden knowledge does not need to be read. It can be received. The brain becomes an antenna, and madness becomes signal fidelity. Those most attuned are destroyed not because they are wrong, but because they are right too early. This culminates in a disturbing implication, that the universe wants to be known, but at a cost. Forbidden knowledge is accessible, but not survivable. It is like an equation that solves itself by deleting the solver. The most powerful entity in this framework is not hiding. It is visible in every ancient ruin, every alien geometry, every chant in a forgotten language. It is the reader who must not look too long. For to truly understand is not to become divine. It is to become unrecognizable. As we transition next to literary case studies, we will see how these ideas are not confined to abstract theory. They are enacted within stories, embodied by characters, and realized through narrative structure. The question shifts from what is the entity to what happens to those who meet it. The stories we will explore next serve as laboratories of contact, controlled exposures to a truth that ruins. The most powerful entity in cosmic horror does not arrive fully formed. It emerges gradually across scattered texts, hints, and revisions. Early appearances are rarely explicit. Instead, they take the form of implications. Offhand remarks, marginal notes, unnamed forces implied rather than shown. This slow emergence is deliberate. Power is established not through introduction, but through accumulation. The entity becomes real because it keeps being referenced from different angles, by different voices, across different stories. One of the earliest structural models appears in Dagon, 1917. The creature itself is not the focus. What matters is the narrator's realization that something ancient predates humanity and still persists beneath the sea. The encounter is brief, but its implications are vast. The story establishes a template. An ordinary man stumbles upon evidence that history is incomplete. The horror lies not in the creature's actions, but in the realization that the world has always been occupied by something else. This marks the first appearance of the cosmic pattern that later entities will embody. By the time of the Call of Cthulhu, in 1926, this pattern becomes explicit. The entity remains largely dormant, imprisoned beneath the Pacific, yet its presence dominates the narrative. Crucially, Cthulhu is never encountered in a stable, coherent way. The famous description, "a mountain walked or stumbled," is deliberately inadequate. The being's power is conveyed through secondary effects: dreams, cults, sculptures, and fractured testimonies. Cthulhu is terrifying not because it acts, but because it connects disparate experiences into a single, unsettling truth. The entity functions as a narrative gravity well. Intertext connections deepen this effect. References to the Necronomicon, Abdul al-Hazred, and ancient cults recur across unrelated stories. A phrase in one text clarifies a symbol in another. A location mentioned in passing becomes central elsewhere. This technique creates the illusion of a shared universe long before modern franchise storytelling. More importantly, it suggests that no single story contains the full truth. The most powerful entity exists between texts, not within them. Readers assemble it the same way characters do, through fragments that never quite align. The Whisperer in Darkness, 1931, extends this strategy by shifting perspective. Here, the horror unfolds through correspondence, lectures, and secondhand reports. The alien Mygo are not ultimate entities, but they introduce a critical idea. Humanity is already known, studied, and exploited. The cosmos is not empty. It is bureaucratic. The most powerful force is implied to be something even the Mygo fear. This nested hierarchy of dread reinforces the sense that every revelation is merely a prelude to something worse. Power recedes as one approaches it. We must pause here. What unites these early appearances is restraint. The entity is powerful because it is never resolved. Each story adds information without closure. This mirrors real historical research, where new findings complicate rather than simplify understanding. Lovecraft structures his mythos to behave like scholarship gone wrong. Footnotes lead to contradictions. Translations disagree. Witnesses die or recant. The narrative function of the entity is to destabilize interpretation itself. Another crucial intertext link is thematic rather than factual. Stories like Nyarlathotep, 1920, and Azathoth, written earlier, published later, introduce entities that operate as metaphors rather than plot devices. Nyarlathotep appears as a traveling showman, spreading madness through technology and spectacle. Azathoth is never seen at all, only inferred as the mindless center of existence. These figures are not connected through storyline, but through concept. Together, they sketch an outline of ultimate power, chaos without intent, knowledge without mercy, presence without meaning. By the early 1930s, the most powerful entity is no longer a single figure. It is a composite idea distributed across texts. This distribution is essential. No one story can contain it. Each appearance refines the concept while preserving ambiguity. The entity evolves not by revelation, but by repetition under variation. As we move next into focused case studies, we will examine how individual stories deepen this concept, testing its limits, refining its role, and revealing why some entities linger longer in cultural memory than others. The Call of Cthulhu is the definitive narrative for understanding how cosmic horror constructs and sustains the concept of the most powerful entity. Though Cthulhu is not the most omnipotent being in the mythos, the story serves as the clearest literary crucible for Lovecraft's method of revealing power through fragmentation, suggestion, and epistemic destabilization. It demonstrates how a single entity can alter perception, culture, and identity without ever acting directly. The structure of the story is deliberately archival. The narrator, Francis Wayland Thurston, assembles his account from scattered materials: a police inspector's notes, a sculptor's dreams, a dead professor's journal, and maritime records. This layering of texts mimics academic research and fosters a sense of reluctant discovery. Cthulhu's presence is inferred, not narrated. This technique becomes essential to the mythology of cosmic power. We learn of the entity through its effects, not its essence. Its influence reaches minds in dreams, reshapes ancient cults, and destabilizes reality, all while it remains entombed beneath the sea. The physical description of Cthulhu appears briefly, but with calculated ambiguity. A monster of vaguely anthropoid outline, but with an octopus-like head, whose face was a mass of feelers, a scaly, rubbery-looking body, prodigious claws on hind and fore feet, and long, narrow wings behind. This is not a definitive image, it's a contradiction in form. Words like vaguely, rubbery-looking, and prodigious signal linguistic breakdown. The narrator attempts to fix Cthulhu in language, but the result is incoherent. This is deliberate. Lovecraft ensures that power is preserved by resisting full representation. The entity exceeds symbolic resolution. Its most horrifying quality is that it can exist without being fully imagined. Cthulhu's rise is temporary and ambiguous. When the crew of the Alert encounters him in the risen city of Relaye, their reactions range from madness to self-sacrifice. The city itself obeys no Euclidean geometry, an angle which was acute but behaved as if it were obtuse. This disorientation of space reflects the larger disruption of sense-making. The being warps the physical world to mirror the collapse of logic. Even Aurelier's architecture is hostile to cognition. The sailors' minds fracture not from violence, but from contact with structure itself. We must pause here. The narrative function of Cthulhu is not to demonstrate power in the traditional sense. He does not speak. He does not conquer. He does not demand worship. And yet, his influence is global. Dreams, rituals, carvings, and coincidences align. The cult of Cthulhu spans continents and eras, from the swamps of Louisiana to the mountains of China. This is crucial. The most powerful entity is not one that intervenes. It is one that radiates. It shapes human belief without conscious effort. Another key detail: when Cthulhu briefly awakens, he is wounded by the prow of a ship. The moment seems to undermine his power. How can the Great Terror be harmed so easily? But this is a misreading. The scene is not about vulnerability. It is about resilience. The creature reforms almost immediately, a viscous flow of unnatural life. The implication is not that he can be destroyed, but that he exists outside biological laws. His apparent form is a placeholder for something else, something that reasserts itself regardless of damage. Finally, the story ends not with triumph, but with containment. Cthulhu sleeps again. R'lyeh sinks, but the cult remains. The narrator offers no reassurance, only delay. He must have been trapped by the sinking, whilst within his black abyss, his master's faithful ones tolled and waited. The horror lies in return, not because it will happen, but because it must. Time is cyclical. The stars will align again. The story offers no closure because cosmic power is not narrative. It is structural. It persists beyond character, setting, or plot. In The Call of Cthulhu, we see how Lovecraft constructs power not through visibility, but through tension, recurrence, and epistemic collapse. The entity is most powerful not when it rises, but when it looms. It reshapes belief, alters perception, and reorganizes thought. It does not destroy the world. It reveals that the world was never ours to begin with. As we move next to another story, the Dunwich Horror, we will explore how lineage, language, and cosmic heredity deepen these themes. If Cthulhu shows us the horror of ancient return, the next tale shows how horror is already within us. If The Call of Cthulhu establishes cosmic terror through scale and implication, the Dunwich Horror explores how that terror operates through heredity, secrecy, and contamination. It is a more terrestrial story, rural rather than oceanic, grounded in folklore rather than dream, but it extends the same themes: the limits of human understanding, the fragility of reality, and the consequences of contact with something too vast to contain. This case study reveals how the most powerful entity in cosmic horror doesn't always arrive from outside. It sometimes grows within. Set in the decaying hills of Dunwich, Massachusetts, the story introduces the Whately family, the albino mother Lavinia, the shadowy grandfather Old Whately, and the grotesquely accelerated child, Wilbur. Wilbur is not fully human. He is a hybrid, part man, part something else. That something else is the invisible twin, a massive being kept hidden in the hills, revealed by the end to be the spawn of Yog-Sothoth. This establishes a new dimension to the mythos. Cosmic entities can reproduce, infiltrate, and alter human lineage. Power becomes genetic. Unlike Cthulhu, Yog-Sothoth never appears directly. His presence is inferred through ritual, blasphemous texts, and the deformed consequences of his union with Lavinia. This absence is meaningful. The most powerful entity remains off stage, shaping events without being bound by them. As the narrator later discovers, Yog-Sothoth is the gate. Yog-Sothoth is the key and the guardian of the gate. This triadic formulation transforms Yog-Sothoth into a metaphysical principle. He is not a being in space. He is space, is time, is the interface between realities. His children are not merely monsters. They are ruptures, tears in the boundary between dimensions. This redefines power as ontological. Yog-Sothoth is terrifying not because he is strong, but because he rewrites the rules of being. Wilbur's quest for the complete Necronomicon is a narrative mechanism that links forbidden knowledge to biological horror. He seeks the unexpurgated Latin version in order to open a gate for his twin to join their father. But the knowledge proves too vast. When Wilbur dies, his body grotesquely non-human, covered in fur and scaled parts. The library guards glimpsed something alien etched into his flesh. The skin was thickly covered with coarse black fur. The arms terminated in tentacles, and beneath the tentacles were eyes. This moment functions as epistemic rupture. Wilbur's death reveals what the town refused to see. The monster was never hidden. It was in them, bred into their soil, their culture, and their bloodlines. Dunwich becomes a microcosm of the human condition under cosmic horror, a community that has unknowingly hosted forces it cannot control or even name. We must pause here. Unlike The Call of Cthulhu, which relies on narrative distance and global implications, the Dunwich Horror stages its drama locally. Yet its reach is metaphysical. The final confrontation, in which invisible, booming footsteps echo across the hills, does not climax with a battle. It ends with a revelation. The invisible being speaks. "I don't have to stay here. I'm going soon." The voice is Wilbur's twin, part human, part cosmic force, finally merging with Yog-Sothoth. The terror lies not in destruction, but in return. The being isn't killed. It simply goes home. The implication is that this dimension was only a temporary exile. What seemed like a threat was merely a misplacement. This story also expands the role of ancient texts and rituals. Here, the Necronomicon is not just dangerous to read, it is necessary for understanding. Dr. Armitage, the librarian hero, uses it to banish the entity. This introduces moral complexity. Forbidden knowledge can be protective, but only for those already prepared to face what it reveals. Most cannot. Thus, the power of the most terrifying entity is doubled. It can destroy those who know too little and those who know too much. In the Dunwich Horror, cosmic horror shifts from maritime to domestic, from the dreamlike to the genealogical. It shows that the horror is not always external. Sometimes it is inherited, internal, and inescapable. The most powerful entity doesn't break into the world. It emerges from beneath it, or from within us. As we move next to examine later contributions and collaborative expansions, we will see how these themes are adapted, codified, and sometimes distorted. The mythology grows, but so does its distance from the unresolvable dread that originally defined it. The mythology of the most powerful cosmic horror entity did not end with Lovecraft. After his death in 1937, a circle of admirers and collaborators began expanding the mythos, sometimes deepening its philosophical ambiguity, sometimes reshaping it to fit more familiar narrative frameworks. The most influential of these was August Derleth, who both preserved and restructured the mythos, introducing theological dimensions that would fundamentally alter the tone and function of its most powerful beings. The evolution is not merely additive, it is transformative. Power, once framed as unknowable, becomes moralized. Derleth's major contribution was to organize the chaotic pantheon into a cosmic dualism: elder gods, benevolent or at least neutral, and great old ones, malevolent. He recast beings like Cthulhu and Yog-Sothoth as elemental forces aligned with evil, and their opponents, such as Nodens or Hypnos, as cosmic counterweights. This was a significant departure. Lovecraft had intentionally avoided good versus evil structures. In his universe, horror arose from scale, not sin. Derleth's reinterpretation made the mythos more accessible, but it also softened its existential dread. The most powerful being now existed within a cosmic order, rather than threatening the idea of order itself. Derleth also introduced a more traditional narrative model: stories with protagonists, conflicts, and moral outcomes. In The Black Island and The Return of Hastur, Characters resist or even thwart the old ones through courage and ancient rites. This shift alters how power is understood. The godlike forces are still immense, but they become resistible. Rituals function like weapons. Texts become instruction manuals. While Lovecraft's horrors invited madness through contact, Derleth's invite confrontation. Cosmic entities become villains rather than metaphysical crises. We must pause here to acknowledge the tension. While Derleth was instrumental in preserving Lovecraft's work, co-founding Arkham House and publishing the collected works, his theological imprint changed the mythos' philosophical fabric. Critics have noted that his elemental classification system, grouping deities by fire, air, water, earth, imposes a taxonomy that Lovecraft had explicitly avoided. The most powerful entity in Derleth's hands is now part of a chart. Its unknowability becomes catalogued. Its horror is narrowed. Despite this, Derleth's expansions were widely influential. Later writers such as Brian Lumley, Lynn Carter, and Ramsey Campbell adapted and extended his framework. Lumley's Titus Crow series, for example, pits human protagonists directly against the great old ones in pulp-style adventures. Here, cosmic horror begins to hybridize with science fiction and fantasy. The entities are still vast, but they now inhabit a mythos where the human spirit has agency. Knowledge can be used. Reality can be contested. Ramsey Campbell took a different path, restoring ambiguity and psychological instability. His stories, set in a fictionalized English landscape, retain Lovecraft's dread, but localize it. The cosmic is refracted through cultural decay and personal obsession. In tales like Cold Print and The Inhabitant of the Lake, Campbell's entities are barely glimpsed, their motivations unknowable. In these versions, the most powerful being is once again inferred. Campbell resists Derleth's moral clarity and returns to destabilizing perception as the core of horror. This branching lineage raises a fundamental question. What happens when an idea designed to remain ambiguous is expanded by multiple authors? The result is a paradox. On one hand, the mythos gains richness and longevity. On the other, it risks coherence. Power that was once defined by absence and implication becomes diluted through repetition and explanation. As more entities are named, categorized, and compared, the original sense of infinite dread can erode. Yet not all later contributions diminish the original power. Writers like Thomas Ligotti returned cosmic horror to its philosophical roots. In stories like The Last Feast of Harlequin, Ligotti reframes the cosmic not as monstrous beings, but as metaphysical truths that nullify the self. His entities are not physical at all. They are ideas that consume identity. This evolution shows that the most powerful figure in cosmic horror can be entirely internal. No tentacles, no ruins, just realization. In the final calculation, the mythos' collaborative expansion reveals its strength. It is modular, interpretive, and self-replicating. Every new voice reimagines the central, terror. The most powerful being is never fixed. It is reshaped by culture, time, and style, but always returns to the same core: the collapse of meaning, the erosion of the self, and the silent presence of something too vast to name. As we move next into the cultural and psychological afterlife of this figure, we will trace how these ideas leave fiction entirely, seeping into hoaxes, sightings, subcultures, and academic theory. The horror, it seems, has outlived the page. The most powerful entity in cosmic horror has long since slipped beyond the boundaries of fiction. It now resides among conspiracy theories, online hoaxes, and whispered legends that blur literature and belief. In this afterlife, cosmic horror operates as a cultural virus, mutating into forms that no longer bear Lovecraft's name, yet carry his themes intact. The question is no longer just, what did the author mean, but why do people keep insisting it might be real? Yet one of the clearest examples is the enduring myth of the Necronomicon. Originally invented by Lovecraft as a fictional grimoire, the book has taken on a reality of its own. Multiple forged editions circulate online and in occult bookstores, some claiming to be translations from the original Arabic, others posing as 17th century reprints. These are not literary artifacts. They are treated by some as genuine magical texts. The power of the entity behind the Necronomicon, whether Cthulhu, Yog-Sothoth, or Azathoth, is reinforced through the myth of forbidden knowledge itself. The hoax succeeds because it reenacts the very structure of cosmic horror, knowledge that should not exist, yet does. Internet folklore has amplified this dynamic. Stories like the Gateway Project or bloop sound, a mysterious underwater frequency detected in the Pacific, have been folded into the mythos. Though the bloop was eventually traced to ice quakes, for years it was rumored to be Cthulhu stirring in his underwater tomb. The viral nature of this myth speaks to a hunger for mystery that science cannot fully resolve. Even when explanations are offered, they often fail to satisfy. The suggestion of something deeper, stranger, older, still haunts the cultural imagination. We must pause here to consider what urban legends accomplish. They are not just entertainment. They are mechanisms for processing uncertainty. The myth of a cosmic entity awakening beneath the sea reflects real anxieties about climate collapse, about seismic instability, about oceans that remain 80% unexplored. In this light, the myth functions not as delusion, but as metaphor. Cthulhu is not just a monster. He is a placeholder for everything we cannot control. Dreams and hallucinations also factor heavily in the real-world absorption of cosmic horror. Online forums, from Reddit's No Sleep to fringe paranormal communities, contain accounts of people dreaming shared symbols, speaking unlearnable languages, or feeling drawn to certain locations. While easily dismissed as fiction or psychological projection, these stories replicate Lovecraft's own devices: distributed revelation, hidden cults, and ontological dissonance. The power of the myth persists because it mimics how belief spreads through repetition, uncertainty, and personal resonance. In some cases, these narratives edge toward religious language. The idea that when the stars are right, something will awaken has been interpreted not metaphorically, but cosmologically. Amateur astronomers and occultists alike have searched for alignments that might fulfill the prophecy. This mirrors how apocalyptic religions form. Through texts read too seriously, symbols mistaken for codes, and metaphors turned into calendars. The most powerful entity becomes a deity, not one that saves, but one that confirms our deepest fears about being small, temporary, and unprepared. Importantly, cosmic horror differs from traditional myth in one key respect. It refuses clarity. Whereas urban legends often feature clear antagonists, ghosts, cryptids, murderers, cosmic entities remain undefined. Their motives are unknowable. Their appearance is contradictory. Their reality is questionable. This ambiguity is not a flaw. It is the essence of their function. By never fully resolving, these beings keep the legend alive. Each retelling adds to the fog rather than cutting through it. As we move next into cultural adaptations, in film, games, and music, we will see how these myths have been reinterpreted for mass audiences. But here, in the raw spread of hoaxes and belief, we glimpse something fundamental. The idea that horror does not stay on the page. It leaks, and in that leakage, the most powerful entity continues to evolve. Not as a monster to be seen, but as a presence to be suspected. The most powerful entity in cosmic horror has not remained confined to literature. It has migrated, subtly but decisively, into modern media. Films, video, games, and music have taken the philosophical core of this figure and restructured it for mass consumption. What remains constant is the entity's narrative function: to confront the audience with vast, impersonal forces that render human effort irrelevant. In each medium, the idea is reshaped, but the dread it carries persists. Cinema has long struggled with the ineffable nature of cosmic horror. Visual media demands form, while the genre's power lies in formlessness. Some of the most effective examples sidestep direct depiction altogether. John Carpenter's The Thing, 1982, is a clear case. The alien presence is never fully seen. It assimilates, mutates, imitates. The terror is ontological, the threat to identity itself. The entity does not hate. It consumes. That is enough. Similarly, Event Horizon, 1997, introduces a spatial anomaly that operates by unknown rules. Characters are not attacked by a creature, but by a place that should not exist, a dimension that breaks memory, time, and perception. The ship has gone somewhere else and returned altered. This reflects the essence of cosmic horror, not invasion, but exposure to a reality where human meaning no longer holds. More recently, The Endless, 2017, portrays a looped timeline governed by an unseen force. Characters are trapped in repeating deaths, watched by something never shown, only hinted at. The entity remains outside the frame. It manipulates causality itself. Power is not demonstrated. It is felt in the rules no longer functioning. Games pose a unique challenge. They are structured around agency, but cosmic horror removes agency. The most faithful adaptations understand this and reframe the player not as savior, but as participant in inevitable collapse. Bloodborne, 2015, exemplifies this approach. Its early hours resemble dark fantasy, but as the player progresses, they uncover a deeper truth. The world has been shaped by alien great ones, entities beyond space and time. Insight, the in-game mechanic representing awareness, literally changes what the player sees. Enemies invisible at first become visible. The higher your insight, the more accurately you perceive the horror. Knowledge is not power, it is vulnerability. Similarly, Amnesia, The Dark Descent, 2010, features a protagonist who slowly remembers the unspeakable actions he committed under the influence of a cosmic force. The gameplay punishes visibility. Looking directly at certain entities damages the character's sanity. The most powerful force in the game is one that cannot be understood or resisted, only survived by fleeing or forgetting. In both titles, the enemy is not a boss to be defeated. It is the truth. What happens when the world you thought you knew becomes false, and something older takes its place? In music, cosmic horror takes a different form: ambient, symbolic, and deeply psychological. The metal genre, especially atmospheric black and doom metal, frequently references mythos elements. Bands like Portal and the Great Old Ones craft albums around themes of ancient deities and collapsing reality. Their sound design leans into dissonance, distorted repetition, and overwhelming volume, creating a sonic texture meant to simulate madness. Even outside of genre boundaries, composers have explored cosmic motifs. Micah Levi's score for Under the Skin, 2013, is a study in unease. Shrill strings and pulsing rhythms echo not fear, but alien presence. The music does not guide emotion, it fragments it. Much like the Mythos entities, it doesn't explain, it disturbs. We must pause here to recognize the medium's adaptability. Music, like cosmic horror, thrives on implication, a repeated tone, an unnatural harmony, a sound that does not resolve. These mirror the genre's core themes. The listener does not learn anything new. They are unsettled by what cannot be named. Across these media, a shared pattern emerges. The entity is never fully seen, never fully explained. Its power is defined by the breakdown of structure, of genre, of mechanics, of expectation. The protagonist does not win. Often there is no antagonist at all, only the realization that nothing was ever stable. The entity's power lies not in action, but in disruption. The rules have changed. The story is no longer about us. As we move next into subcultural and academic spaces, we'll see how this figure functions not just as a narrative device, but as a symbol of broader cultural anxiety. Its evolution from literature to media has made it more accessible, but not less disturbing. In each adaptation, the most powerful entity reminds us, survival is possible. Understanding is not. The most powerful entity in cosmic horror has become more than a literary invention. It now functions as a cultural symbol, continuously adapted and reinterpreted by subcultures, fandoms, artists, and scholars. Its reach extends into spaces where horror is not just consumed, but reframed as aesthetic, as metaphor, as philosophical lens. These appropriations are not uniform. Some trivialize, others deepen, but all of them keep the entity alive by making it useful. In subcultures ranging from occult communities to heavy metal fandoms, entities like Cthulhu and Yog-Sothoth have become mythic emblems. T-shirts, tattoos, and even plush toys of Cthulhu circulate widely, not as jokes, but as symbols of fascination with unknowable forces. The irony is intentional. The image of a plush cosmic god fuses dread with absurdity, reinforcing a theme already present in the mythos, the collapse of scale. Cthulhu's form becomes a visual shorthand for feeling small in a chaotic universe. Tabletop role-playing games have also played a significant role in translating these beings into subcultural currency. Call of Cthulhu, first released in 1981, offers players a unique experience. Rather than conquering monsters, investigators often lose sanity or die. The system rewards knowledge, but punishes curiosity, a perfect narrative mirror of cosmic horror's core tension. Players reenact the myth. Discovery leads to ruin. This dynamic has helped embed the mythos in gaming culture, where power is usually heroic, but here is fatal. In academic spaces, cosmic horror has shifted from niche pulp to legitimate field of study. Scholars across literature, philosophy, religious studies, and even environmental humanities have explored the implications of Lovecraft's work. One central topic is anthropocentrism, the assumption that human beings are the center of meaning. Cosmic horror rejects this outright, and scholars have used it to challenge Western narratives of progress, mastery, and permanence. Philosopher Eugene Thacker, in the Dust of This Planet, 2011, argues that horror offers a way to think about the world without us. He describes Lovecraft's work as weird theology, a method of confronting a reality where human concepts no longer apply. In this reading, the most powerful entity is not just monstrous, it is philosophical absence. It marks the point where thought fails. This use of horror as metaphysical critique shows how deeply the mythos has embedded itself in modern intellectual discourse. We must pause here. What does it mean that fictional beings, never intended as religious figures, are now analyzed as philosophical problems? It suggests that the entity's function has evolved. It no longer terrifies only by story. It now haunts ideas. The classroom, like the cult, becomes a site of encounter. Online spaces have allowed communities to build their own versions of the mythos, often ironic, but still strangely sincere. Memes featuring Cthulhu for president, with slogans like, "Why vote for the lesser evil?" play on political disillusionment by invoking a being that doesn't pretend to care. Here, the most powerful entity becomes satire. But the satire reveals a deeper truth. Power, on a cosmic scale, is already impersonal. Fan fiction and collaborative writing forums have also extended the mythos into new territories. Writers insert the entities into modern settings: corporate offices, space stations, suburban neighborhoods, testing what happens when the cosmic intrudes on the mundane. These expansions are not canon, but they function within the tradition. The rules remain. Knowledge is dangerous. Identity is porous. Meaning is unstable. In visual arts, especially in graphic novels and digital illustration, the challenge is how to depict what is by definition indescribable. Artists like Michael Bukowski and Zdzisław Beksinski explore this tension through abstract, biological, and surreal forms. Their work avoids cartoonish representations and instead emphasizes structure collapse, shapes that don't resolve, faces that blur, limbs that multiply without logic. These images resonate because they invite the same mental response as the original texts: interpretive exhaustion. In design and fashion, cosmic horror has also influenced aesthetics. Fashion brands have released collections inspired by eldritch themes: decay, recursion, negative space. This shows that the mythos is no longer just about narrative. It's a mood, a style, a way of relating to the unknown. The power of the entity endures because it never hardens into dogma. It can be reimagined endlessly: serious, ironic, satirical, scholarly. It adapts to different cultural climates. In times of existential fear, climate anxiety, AI uncertainty, ecological collapse, the idea of an impersonal, unchangeable force resonates. People do not always believe in the entity literally, but they feel its metaphor, that we are not in control. As we now turn to the psychological and philosophical implications, we leave behind adaptations and return to confrontation. What does it mean to live in a world shaped by an idea too large to contain? The final horror is not the creature. It is the thought that made it necessary. The most powerful entity in cosmic horror persists not because it appears, but because it suggests. Its strength lies in what it causes us to question about knowledge, selfhood, and reality itself. Long after the stories are read, what remains is not an image or a name, but an idea that the human mind may be fundamentally unsuited to the universe it occupies. This is the true function of cosmic horror's central figure, not to frighten in the moment, but to linger as an unresolved tension between perception and truth. At the psychological level, the mythos speaks to a recurring human fear: insignificance. In the face of billions of years and infinite space, our individual lives appear absurd. Cosmic horror doesn't invent this fear. It confirms it, then elevates it into a metaphysical condition. Entities like Azathoth or Yog-Sothoth do not threaten human survival directly. They threaten the framework in which survival has meaning. They present a cosmos that is not hostile, but uncaring, vast enough that human values do not register. This confrontation often leads to what psychologists describe as existential anxiety, a destabilization of the self in the face of overwhelming ambiguity. Stories in this tradition replicate that destabilization structurally. Characters lose track of time, of memory, of their own identities. In the shadow. Out of time, the protagonist's consciousness is displaced across eons, and he returns to his body altered, no longer certain which thoughts are his. This narrative device reflects a deeper truth, the fear that our sense of self is contingent, easily disrupted, and perhaps illusory. We must pause here. Cosmic horror functions by stripping away what modern thought often takes for granted: the reliability of memory, the stability of identity, the knowability of reality. In doing so, it anticipates philosophical concerns found in thinkers like Martin Heidegger, who explored the anxiety of being thrown into a world not of one's choosing, and Jean-Paul Sartre, who described consciousness as a self that constantly tries to ground itself in a groundless world. The most powerful entity in this genre is not just a creature, it is the absence of grounding. It is the void where meaning should be. This leads to a final, haunting implication, that knowledge itself is corrosive. In most genres, revelation leads to resolution. In cosmic horror, revelation leads to collapse. To know more is not to be empowered, it is to be unmade. The famous line from The Call of Cthulhu is more than poetic. The most merciful thing in the world is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. The line warns that coherence is dangerous, that the mind survives only because it doesn't fully understand. The most powerful being in cosmic horror is terrifying not because of what it does, but because of what it makes possible: the total alignment of mind and reality, followed by the total disintegration of both. In this light, the mythos becomes a metaphor for limits, of science, of philosophy, of language. It questions whether the human project of ordering the world was always doomed to fail. Some scholars have suggested that cosmic horror is not pessimistic, but honest, a literature that refuses false hope. It does not offer transcendence. It offers confrontation. Whether one crumbles or adapts is left unanswered. This open-endedness is why the idea continues to endure. The most powerful entity is not bound to a single form, story, or meaning. It is an evolving symbol for everything that exceeds the mind's reach. It can be a monster, a void, a principle, a whisper, a question with no end. The stories may close, but the suggestion does not. And that is its final power, not destruction, but the refusal to let us stop thinking.